Welcome to the Weaving Magic podcast,
where we discuss the different ways to weave magic throughout your daily life.
We are your hosts, Alyssa Lilly
and Tara Webb,
and we are thrilled to guide you in this magical journey of exploration and ritual.
Welcome back to the Weaving Magic podcast. I'm your host, Tara Webb.
And I'm your host, Alyssa Lilly.
And today we have just an amazing person. I love KristaLyn so much. And we met because, well, they write amazing books. That's one thing. But we're going to talk about astrology today. And KristaLyn, thank you for joining us. How do you weave magic in your everyday life?
So I, as an astrologer, took it to the nth degree. And I could explain it in my astrology why I did this, but I actually understood astrology, loved it, and decided it's not a hobby, it's a lifestyle. So I pursued becoming an astrological mage, which integrates in my every morning where I'm doing just some ritual work, some dedication kind of work. And also I make talismans to help people align as well.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
I got chills when you talk about that.
Yeah. I made an entire room in my house as an apothecary just for the stuff that I do. So it's my favorite.
My inner witch is squealing right now.
So how did you come across this title, astrological mage?
It's actually the traditional title. So when you study for it, you become an astrological magician or magus, or it comes from all that Latin source text that we draw from. If you've ever heard of Cornelius Agrippa, the 3 books of occult philosophy, Picatrix, I actually was able to study under the person who translated Picatrix recently out of Latin. So I always like to go back to the source. I have a lot of earth energy in my chart. So for me, it's, who's the closest to the source of this and how can I learn as close to them as possible to make sure that integrity is maintained.
I feel that so deeply as a Taurus.
Isn't it important?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Same.
Taurus is in the house. We're all Tauruses.
Are we?
Yeah.
Nice. Well, happy birth times.
It is our season.
Yeah.
I actually never knew that was the original name. And that just gives me chills, like just hearing that title, right? It's even more the magic of what astrology actually is.
Yeah.
Astrology is the thing right now. Like it's the cool thing the kids do.
Yeah, it's risen up a little bit, hasn't it? Yeah.
So what would you recommend for someone who is like maybe just diving in a little bit, but really, as you say, goes back to the source, wants to do it to where it feels more in integrity, not just like, oh,
I read in the newspaper my sign today.
Yeah. And that can even be, very vague. So I don't blame people who read the newspaper horoscopes and are like, astrology, because that's not how horoscopes were originally designed. And the way that they are done now is different from that. And there is a way to do it. And that can be very helpful, but it's more specific when you actually read your horoscope for your rising sign. That's like my favorite tip to give people, especially when you're starting out and exploring, like, do I jive with astrology? Does it make sense to me? Does it relate to me and feel important to me? Start experiencing it. And then as you experience it and come to know it, then you can go into learning to study it and learning to witness it. And astrological magic for me was the step into participating. So that's just my differentiation, because I feel like people who do electional astrology or just observe astrology and try to align their intention with what's going on around them, that's definitely participatory. So for people just starting, it's figuring out what branch of astrology lights your fire. Because there are several ways that you can go. With astrology, we now have, thanks to this project called Project Hindsight that translated a lot of documents that we didn't have access to before. That was back in the mid-90s, I believe, that it really got going. And now we understand what's called Hellenistic astrology from Greco-Roman sources. And that is 2,000 years ago. And it cites that, Babylonians were practicing 2,000 years before that. So we know that there's a history now. We're kind of reclaiming it and it's reemerging. So you can go in through what's now considered traditional astrology, which would be Hellenistic, even the medieval and Renaissance periods, or you can go with the more modern astrology, which is, sun sign astrology, the Placidus house chart that you'll pull up on the websites that give you your free chart, evolutionary astrology, which really studies the soul. There's also Vedic astrology. I hope I say that right. I never know if it's Vedic or Vedic, because I know, right, with Ayurveda, they're very similar. It's the astrology from the Indian culture, and they do a different house system, a different system of signs and everything like that. So you want to figure out where you're drawn and how the sky is calling you to observe it, because the sky exists regardless, and we're just trying to understand it. So we've come up with a few different languages to do that in the best way that we can, and that's where astrology comes in and branches out.
So basically finding the dialect that you understand, or
Yes.
jives with you a little bit better. I like that.
Yeah, for me, it was Hellenistic astrology. That's where I got my start. I came from a very Christian upbringing, so I wanted to be able to really graduate into it in a way that made sense with my upbringing, that made sense with my values. And as I explored, it only grew my understanding of worldview. It changed a couple things for sure, but it grew my connection to the divine even more. And I really adored that, which is one of the reasons why I took it as far as I could to really immerse myself in that intention and the whole universal kind of aspect of it.
And I love that you called it a lifestyle. I want to hear more about that. How have you made this and adapted it to your everyday life?
Oh, it's so much easier than you think, actually. So when I was doing my course in astrological magic, it was this year-long practice study where the person who does the course, his name is Christopher Warnock, and he is the one who translated the Picatrix into this Latin translation we were using. And there are many other texts as well, but that was just his, most recent project. And as I was learning from him, he makes you wait for his feedback so that he's maintaining your integrity, making sure you're not tripping up or making some errors that could really cause some problems if the energy gets a little bit wacky, right? So it's kind of like a Ouija board. You can use a Ouija board, but if you don't know what you're doing with it, weird stuff can happen. So he really was a steward of all of the students that were involved, making sure that we understood the techniques and the sources and having to read all the source texts and practice. And it was wonderful. And one of the first things that we learned was that every day of the week is associated with a planet, and that there are different things you can do to say, hey, sun, it's Sunday, or, recording this now, we're on a Saturn day, which makes even more sense. And if you're looking to remember the associations, it's actually easier to do it in Spanish because the root words are maintained there. So if you look at lunes, Monday, lunar, and so that's the moon day. You have martes, which is Tuesday, and I'm not very good at the whole inflection of Spanish, so I apologize. I do study it, but I don't get to speak it that much. But
there's a difference between the reading and the saying.
Yeah, but martes is Mars. And then, you can go from there. Viernes, being Friday, is Venus day. And so you can kind of associate that way. If anybody has even maintained your high school language memory that way. And so every day at sunrise, because in the sunrise hour of the planetary day, it is that planetary hour at the same time. So I just honor that day being of that planet. And it's one of my favorite things to do. Right now, as I'm approaching my birthday, I'm doing planetary charity for a planet that I know astrologically is going to be working closely with me over the next year. So I find something that is aligned with that planet. In this case, it's the sun, and the sun really does help govern the brain and the circulation. So I'm donating to a cause for a little known syndrome and or disease called Moya Moya, which I also happen to have. So I was like, yay, I get to donate to this cause, which I'm very excited about. And it's aligning me with the year ahead.
What is Moya Moya? I'm just curious now.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, I encourage anybody to look it up. It could use a little bit more awareness, but it's a syndrome or it's very unsure. There's like two versions of it. And I was not given a lot of information on it because I was 9. And you're born with your carotid arteries closed into your circulation to your brain. So I went through my first 8 years with hair thin blood flow to my brain, which caused some problems. And then I had a brain surgery, which was fun. And after that, it's mitigated, but it's not necessarily like removed. It's one of those things that just kind of stays with you. So it's yeah, it's got it. I'm a lucky person when it comes to my condition with this, because I am able to do a lot more than is expected for a lot of people who have this. So I'm grateful for that every day.
And I think it's so beautiful how you're just aligning with your dharma so much, and wanting to donate, and it's something that's exactly in alignment with who you are. Like it just all falls into alignment as you start studying and being who you're supposed to be, who you feel called to be. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I mean, how many times can you call it a synchronicity, right?
Yeah.
Or coincidence?
Yeah, exactly. After a while, it's like everything, there's no need to talk about synchronicity or coincidence except to honor it and acknowledge that it's awesome that it happens, because it can be there in literally everything that's going on. Some astrologers like to say that every person you meet is a transit, because you can find them reflected in what the universe is doing around you at that point.
So how did you get started in this? How did you choose to dive into astrology?
Yeah. So again, I was from that Christian background, but along the way, when I had to have this surgery, so it is kind of great that it came up, a member of my church at the time, as we were asking, hey, can you add Krista to the prayer list? She came up to me and she said, I do this kind of faith energy healing thing, and it can't hurt, it can only help. And it was therapeutic touch, which is very similar to quantum touch. And so I worked with her a couple of weeks ahead of actually going to the surgery. I realized I can see energy, I can feel energy, and I can do all these things with energy, which really led me down my psychic mediumship development. And I got certified in over 15 different metaphysical techniques, trying to learn how to really master the ability to witness and abide by energy and help other people with that as well. And at some point, I couldn't get it out of my head that astrology needed to be where I went next, and it kept popping up, talk about synchronicities. It was just everywhere. So I said, okay, God, if you want me to do this, which the church kind of would say you don't, but if you do, make it inevitable. Like, give me something that makes it feel okay for me. And the next thing I know, I'm watching this documentary my dad brought home randomly about the Christmas star and how it lines up with the constellations, and how, the wise men were astrologers. And I was like, okay, permission granted, I'm going for it. So I found Hellenistic astrology, found the course I wanted to take, and dove in. Yeah.
I love that. So would you say that Hellenistic astrology is, you said about 2000 years ago, roughly, that's about the time that I'm trying to think as far as like the Bible terms, that's when they started, it's after the death of Jesus, right? Like that's when it's supposed to.
Yeah, for the most part, it originated in Alexandria in Egypt and things. So I'm questioning whether it's the 2000, but I think it is the 2000. I'm pretty sure I got that right. It's definitely not as much BC as it is AC. So it would be around the 2000 mark.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I'm trying to fit it into my brain as like where, because they hear so much now about well, the reason that they were drawing the fish symbol is because of it being Pisces and like that kind of stuff. And so that makes me think back to the astrology.
Fun fact about that, you've heard of the Age of Aquarius, I'm sure. That's actually a reference to an actual phenomena that is called the precession of equinoxes. So basically the fact that we have the signs as they were, and how the wobble of the earth makes things kind of go out of that alignment. And so the equinox in astronomy, so in physical space, does move, and it takes, I believe the number is like 24,000 years is a cycle. I'd have to look at my one book to make sure about that. I am not great with numbers unless it's in astrology for some reason. But at the time of Jesus, we were moving into the age of Pisces, which we are currently still in.
Okay.
And it will be another few hundred years, I believe, before we move into the actual age of Aquarius, give or take a century, because it is a little bit arbitrary, not arbitrary, but hard to calculate that exact moment where it shifts. So we are in the shift towards the age of Aquarius, and we are in a cycle right now that is highly Aquarian, both thanks to what's called a grand conjunction, or a great conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter that happened at the end of 2020. And also thanks to Pluto about to move into Aquarius. So those themes are definitely still prominent.
I love you, Pluto.
Me too. I have Pluto on my ascendant and my moon. So it's like front and center. And I did not know this when I was in 3rd grade and they took Pluto, the planetary status away, and I protested. And literally 8-year-old me went around to all the classrooms and got signatures and all that kind of stuff and sent it in. And it turns out later Pluto and I are close.
I love that. So we hear so much about, if you're in the spiritual community right now, about it being the age of Aquarius already. And so you're saying it's more of a transition. And if you look at our astrological forecast of the year, would you say that aligns with that transition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't say that we're in the age of Aquarius as it's known in like traditional astrology by the data. But I do think that we are in an era of Aquarius. Saturn, ruler of Aquarius, traditionally is in Aquarius right now as well. So you had this great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, and they do that every 20 years, but it goes in a cycle where every 20 years it was in an earth sign. And so every 200 years it shifts elements. So we're entering a new age of air where they will meet up every 20 years in the air signs. And it'll be another, I think if I get my numbers right, it's 400 or 800 years before it comes back around to Aquarius again. So by then we'll probably be surely in the age of Aquarius. I consider this, as a storyteller, the prequel. So we're kind of in the establishing moments of that age of Aquarius, getting used to it, bringing in an entire generation of human beings soon when Pluto moves in next year to Aquarius that will be defined by this moment of Pluto shaking things up in Aquarius. By the way, Pluto is the indicator of generational transitions. So millennials have Pluto in Scorpio, Gen Z have Pluto in Sagittarius, and you can break it down by subgenerations the further in you come by planets.
I didn't know that.
It's a fun fact, isn't it? Yeah,
just blew my mind.
Yeah. But I mean, I got chills as you were saying all that multiple times. I was like, switching over here. And the way you describe that as a prequel is, because we're saying everyone's awakening right now. And I'm looking at my kids that are born and just how much more aware they are right now. But technically we're going to be more into the Aquarius later. And it really makes sense because we're that shift, we're that stepping stone to where when it is the full age, there is that more acceptance, right? That we're all stepping towards that more awareness, the more love, all of that energy. That makes so much sense.
And it's shaken up all the systems too, like government systems, it's a whole global experience of all of this transition and shifting of energy.
Yeah. And if you think about it as someone who is intuitive or even sensitive to energy, when I was a child, being aware of that would not have been a good thing. Now it's totally fine because people are coming to that understanding and integrating it. And there's less to fear because we're knowing it more. And we're kind of, to me, it is what in the Christian faith people really strive for, that deep connection, personal connection with God. I found it with astrology and with my intuition and with, psychic work and mediumship when appropriate. And it's just really helpful.
And I think what better way, in my opinion, to connect with the divine, to God, to source by looking at the stars.
Exactly. It's literally in the Bible, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord.
Yeah.
I love that. That's like my favorite thing. Also the wise men, my favorite people in the Bible. I mean, Jesus aside, I like him too. I work a lot with the Christos kind of energy with that energy. So it's really great.
So do you enjoy looking more at where we are, like, looking at more futuristic and present, or do you enjoy looking at past, like, what happened?
So I enjoy blending them. One of the things that I tend to do is when something is happening now, in order to understand in context what exactly is going to happen, because a planet will give you an archetype, a sign will give you an archetype, angles to other planets will give you more archetypes. And then you could thread together a pretty well fleshed out idea of what might happen. But the planets are going in circles. They are cycles. So if you go to the last time this happened, you can see what began then, or you can see what happened then. And then you can say, oh, wow. So more specifically, we might be looking at something like this. And that happens a lot in the astrological community when we're looking ahead to something. What happened last time? So that we can use that as context for this. One of my favorite new phrases that I was introduced to recently was history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And so if it's going to go through that cycle again, like right now where, where Uranus is, where Pluto is. We're having the United States Pluto return right now. So the last time this happened, the United States was born. And so you can see a lot of similar themes coming out of it. And I won't go into detail because everyone is totally entitled to their opinions and their beliefs in this, but you can see a lot of comparisons to the way people felt, thought, and acted then to the way a lot of people feel, think, and are acting now.
That's a lot to digest and
I
really
know.
powerful.
Yeah.
My goodness.
It's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
For someone diving in, then would you say it's good for them to start, because I know you love rising signs, to look at a rising sign more so than your sun, your moon?
Yeah, because it feels so much more personal. And if you'd like, I can explain exactly why that is.
Yeah.
So the rising sign is truly the Eastern horizon. What was on the Eastern horizon the moment you were born? So when you're looking at a circular astrology chart, you're actually looking at a flattened pizza version of a 3D sky. So if you cut it in half, top to bottom, the top half is the sky above you. It's everything that's up there right now. If you look at the bottom half, it's everything that is below the horizon right now. So like if the sun is in the bottom half of your chart, you were born at night. And I can know that just by looking at your chart without even noticing the time, because the sun had set, it was below the horizon. That horizon line is actually defined by your ascendant and your midheaven and your descendant and it's called the imum coli, but it's the bottom. It's the opposite of the midheaven. So the ascendant actually establishes where your chart begins as well. If your ascendant is in Scorpio, like myself, then that's going to start your first house, regardless of the house system you use. In the house system that I prefer, based from Hellenistic astrology, so as close to the source as I could get, I use the whole sign house system, which means automatically, if I know that Scorpio is my first house, I know Sagittarius is my second. And I know all the way around to the 12th, what sign is where. And what planets are where is just knowing the astrology of that day. So if I'm reading a horoscope, I can actually say, oh, these influences are happening in these areas of my life. And that's what the horoscope is doing. It's saying, in finances right now, this and this and this. If it's abundant, well, Venus may be in Taurus. And so they're talking about that. But also if they know your sun sign and they're talking about finances and you happen to be a Taurus, they're probably talking about something happening in Sagittarius. Or sorry, if you're a Taurus sun, they're talking about something that's happening likely in the next sign over, which I believe for Taurus risings, that is Gemini. I don't know. I'm backwards, but I actually have a chart right here I can look at. One sec. Yeah. So it would be something happening in Gemini would affect you in your second house of finances and resources. If your sun's there and your rising sign isn't, that's all wonky. So you're turning the dial in a way that not necessarily. Now, perfecting it from the sun, which is what solar horoscopes do, can really resonate because your sun is your source of self, your source of energy. So it's a good starting place to have. And it was easier to know than an ascending sign because the ascendant is defined by your minute of birth. And not everybody had that. So yeah. Because the ascendant will change over the course of 2 hours, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. So it makes it very specific and very unique to you, which is fantastic. And since a lot of people have access to their exact place, date, and time of birth, it kind of opens the world a lot for you when you get to use that.
I feel that. I know for my husband in particular, he never understood astrology and never aligned with his sun sign because he's a hermit and he likes his own energy and he's a Sag sun. And it's like, oh, this doesn't resonate with me. Yeah. And I'm curious what his rising is because he might resonate with that a lot more than he does his sun.
Yeah, I know my own partner, we assumed based on the time that was on his birth certificate, safe assumption, we assumed that he was born right around sunrise, which made him a sun and ascendant in Gemini. So we operated on the assumption that he was very Gemini, and he could not figure out why, because he hates talking to people. And we came to find out from his mom, they'd written his birth time down wrong. They made it a 4 when it should have been a 9. So we had 5 hours difference that made him a Leo rising. And you can believe it because if you saw his hair, we'd all be jealous. He has amazing hair. And of course, Leos Leo's ascendants specifically are known for just how their hair is glorious. They have that lion's mane kind of going on, and he fits right into that.
So I'm curious on something that I hear a lot in the spiritual community about astrology, and a lot of these different systems that we use to understand ourselves is that it can come to a point where we tend to put ourselves in a box versus allowing us to embrace and move in a way that's natural. And it's hard for me to, after having this conversation, to wrap my mind around that, because it seems so expansive versus restrictive. And I'm just kind of curious on what your thoughts are with people getting stuck in that mindset.
Yeah, it's funny. I experienced this even after understanding astrology when I encountered human design, because all of a sudden I was a projector and I had to wait for invitations. And I was just thinking, like, where are those going to come from? I live in the middle of nowhere. Human design is helpful. It's a really great tool. I find, since they're very connected, astrology is where I can find even more detail. So I specialize in that, but I do acknowledge human design as an art form. When it comes to pigeonholing yourself into your sign, it really helps to remember you're not just one sign. The entire chart is you. The whole sky was there that day that you were born. So it's not just your sun, your moon, or your rising, which are big three personality indicators, but you've got your Venus, and your Venus is going to rule two different signs in your chart, which are going to be in two different houses in your chart. And Venus may not be in either one of those. So that makes it even more complex. My recommendation, because in astrology, there are the people who are like, is it fate or is it fortune or is it free will? I blend those. I think that these are the conditions. My husband's a meteorologist, so I like to use weather analogies. If it's raining today, I can go out in the rain and get wet, but I also know myself. So I know I want a raincoat because I don't like being soaked to the bone. And so my chart will say, oh, you're someone who would prefer to just dance in the rain. Oh, you're someone who might need a raincoat. So the transits will let me know if it's a rainy day for me. And I can go with that, or I can ignore it, which is fine. It's the same thing as with if you do a tarot pull every day and you happen to pull the Tower card and you think I am doomed to break a leg today, or I am doomed to fall down the steps, or it could be something else entirely. So it really helps if you're looking for that ability to fully express yourself, which is what your chart wants from you anyway. If you lived your whole life not knowing your chart, you'd still do it great. You would be living it just as much as you would be if you knew it. But it helps to know that astrology is, we call it archetypally predictive. Here's the kind of energy you're in right now, sunny, rainy, whatever, and you get to decide how you thrive in that energy. And we can find hints in the chart as to how you might best navigate that, but that's still up to you. Every choice you make, whether our lives are predetermined or not, we can't tell. So even if free will is an illusion, it's still there. So have fun. And, do the things that bring you joy. That's always been my primary directive for anyone who asks.
And I love it just the more that we're talking about it, because astrology is one of those things that's always been really intimidating for me because it's a lot of information. It's understanding the universe and how it's reflected within yourself seems so expansive. And I've never really thought about it like that. So I'm just sitting here dumbfounded at the moment. I think astrology is calling to me.
Ooh, that'd be fun. We could talk about it even more.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to take in. But once you understand the general base concepts, it's like when you learn piano and they say, well, now that you've learned piano, the other instruments will come a little bit more naturally too. Astrology is very much the piano of the esoteric arts that I have pursued. So I'm certified in 15 different metaphysical techniques and healing modalities. And I've run the gamut of like, ooh, what does this button do in the metaphysical world? And when I came to astrology, it was like, oh, well, yeah, this actually relates. I can read tarot because I can reflect it back to astrology. I can do a lot of things because the foundational knowledge came to me while I was with astrology. Numerology makes sense with the houses that are in astrology. Not to say that they don't branch out from there and aren't more complex than that, but I have a foundational place to begin with everything else I've encountered in metaphysics and spirituality, thanks to astrology. So once you get that foundation, it really is helpful.
Astrology is the secret cipher.
Yeah, it even looks like it.
Yeah.
So have you dove into the other ones? And can you give like a little idea of the soul one is so fascinating to me.
Yeah. So There's two different main branches of astrology, and that would be Vedic and Western. And they have different ways of looking at the sky. So Vedic actually uses the constellations to chart the stars and the placements. Western astrology is different. It actually, the reason why, like, we'll say, oh, Jupiter's in Cancer, and someone else is like, no, it's over in here right now. That's because the way that you read it in Western is based on the seasons. So you break up the turning of the seasons into signs and you put them along the ecliptic and say this section of the sky is governed by this energy from our perspective. So it's less about being like on the money with locational, more astronomy kind of stuff. And it's more about how are we receiving this energy from where we're standing. Vedic does, I'm not as versed in Vedic. I just understand that their sidereal astrology is based on the fixed stars and based on the constellation. So that's how they measure and calculate the way that they're going to interpret the chart. That moves the planets around a little bit in their chart and they interpret it that way. And 9 times out of 10, it comes out with the same message anyway, because the sky doesn't care how we're trying to understand it. The sky's going to do what it's going to do. And so we, through study and experience over millennia, have found ways to do that, and more than one way. It seems, even through my own experience experimenting with different house systems, more than one way will give you the truth, because the truth's not going to be denied one way or another. So just learning it in the technique that calls to you, that's how you're supposed to understand it, and that's how you will then give it to the people who are called to you to help them understand it. So it's just being what another one of my mentors calls being a link in the chain, which is really an honor. When it comes to the branches of Western astrology, you do have people who look at a chart in different tones. So you have people who see the chart as sort of the music of the spheres, and they view it harmonically, where things are octaves, and they see how those wavelengths reflect to each other. Again, all of it feels valid to me, because I've noticed how you can see that working. And so if I come to the chart asking for my transits for the day and what do I need to know, I come to the chart saying, what am I going to wear today, to be very basic, and I'll read it in a mundane transit kind of natal level. If I come to the chart saying, universe, tell me what I'm missing, I'm reading it in an esoteric level. So the planets are still there, but the moon, rather than being my body and how I navigate the world, might be my spirit and my spirituality and my intuition. So it's just a matter of the angle you're looking at it. And you can choose, if you specialize in helping people really grow their spirits and understand even past lives and reincarnations, there's a way you can look at the chart and you can see indicators that might help with that. And I've dabbled in a lot of it, and I will continue to, but I also am someone who likes to master one thing, so I can talk really well about this one thing and then appreciate and learn from others about the things that I don't know. So I specialize with the Hellenistic astrology, and I can answer any question that comes up. It's so great. When someone's like, I'm having this rough time, I can look at their chart and be like, oh, well, this might be helpful. I'm also a certified life, spiritual, and nutrition coach, because I wanted to have the technique of being able to communicate to someone where they need to hear it, whatever the chart is saying.
I love that so much, because, you hear the balancing, well, but it's Vedic and it's Western, and which one's right? And it's really looking at it as they're both right.
Mm-hmm.
Because truth is universal. Truth doesn't change at all. And whenever I'm talking with my parents, for an example, my dad is a retired minister, and so I believe we have the same beliefs in a sense, and his are more set. And I will talk to him on his level of like understanding things. And that's basically what I just heard you say, that, you're looking at, hey, you need help with this. Well, you can communicate it in a way they understand by looking at the chart. And that's just so beautiful to bridge that almost misunderstanding into it's just truth.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, again, the planets are up there. The one thing I always say to my husband is, at least I know where Mars is going to be tomorrow, and you can't tell me if it's going to rain. Somebody help me. I need more control than this. I have a lot of Earth in my chart. But for that, if the universe came into being, or God created the universe, or whatever creation process you have, you believe with and align with, and I think they all kind of come back to a similar truth anyway. The sky is there. we can see that. So we can see what it's doing. And that is, to me, the language of the universe. That's another popular astrology concept is this is the language of the universe. Astrologers are translating. And so we're just doing our best to decipher the language, translate it, and offer it to people so that they can use it however they need to, whatever they need from it. It's not our place to tell you what to do. We can make suggestions if you're looking for them. It's not our place to do gloom and doom. 2020 was a heck of a ride, and some people saw that coming, and astrology definitely corresponded with it. But it was hard to say exactly, precisely what would happen. Though, again, there was this, his name is Barbeau, and he said, in 2020, during this conjunction, we'll probably have a pandemic. You look at it and it's like, wow, good job. But yeah, it's the sky is there and we get to see it and interpret it. And so honoring that language and message from the divine, to me, it's my purpose in life. I love it.
Well, I'm curious, since we have talked about this a little bit now, what could you say as far as a forecast to expect for this coming year? I mean, I don't think we have as intense of a one as 2020, but I know this year is it's a Bronco ride, as we were talking before.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Barbeau, when he was calculating like the next century, there's a whole spreadsheet that I've been able to see. And it was like the worst days, the lowest pits the lowest dips in the wavelength of this century actually happened in April. So the worst of the century, according to this calculation and this theory, we're working our way back up now. And I think we can all feel that in a sense. There's still not a sense of stability where we would like it. And by all means, Uranus is in Taurus. Uranus is the pinnacle of instability, and that's supposed to be happening. I like to say Uranus is the one that you either are really excited for change or change happens to you, but either way, the change is happening. And, to me, as a Taurus sun, change has been happening. And I have learned, I always harken back to how I forced myself to enjoy roller coasters as a child by just screaming with a smile on my face. And eventually that smile felt more genuine because I was able to adapt and expand my comfort zone, which is another big thing that Uranus in Taurus is asking us to do. So up until this point, we've had a really front heavy 2022. And the rest of it is, I wouldn't say it's like subtle, but it is so much calmer than the last few years have been. So we actually just in this beginning of the year, the nodes of the moon have shifted. Now, those are important, especially in your esoteric astrology, because they go into, life direction, past life, karma, whatever. In more like a Hellenistic astrology where they're mentioned, it's sort of, this is what's being incarnated and this is what's being deteriorated, what we're letting go of and what we're drawing in. And my one mentor likes to call it the mouth and the tail. In Vedic astrology, they are Rahu and Ketu, or Ketu, and they are the head and the tail of the dragon from the creation myth. So one is the mouth, it is devouring, it is at the beginning of it. And the other one is the tail, it is releasing. And so they are always opposite each other and they always move backwards around the zodiac. So they had been in Gemini and Sagittarius. And if you find that in your chart, you'll notice over the last year and a half before last November-ish, lots of changes were happening in that area of your life. Those two areas represented by Sagittarius and Gemini. Now we have a Taurus, Scorpio nodal axis. That was previewed in, I believe I have it here, the lunar eclipse was, I think back in October or November, where we had the first eclipse, because they danced around the sign cusp for a second. So one was in Sagittarius and one was with Scorpio. And of course, I'm looking at this wonderful list I made myself. Yeah, so it was on the 19th of November that we had that eclipse. And that was the beginning. After that, then the nodes finally came in January to switch. So I would look at your chart and see where the eclipses for this year, which are happening on April 30th, May 16th, and then later in the year on, let me make sure I've got them right here, on October 25th and November 8th. Those are going to be kind of anchor points in this big transitional phase. And it doesn't have to be horrible or scary or like whatever. For me, it was, the last one was on my 2nd and 8th house axis. And what happened to me was this saga of someone trying to scam me out of my money with the threat of lawsuits. So second house is money, eighth house is other people's money, and can sometimes be the lawsuits as well. And so they were threatening to sue me over something that didn't exist. It wasn't real. And every time the eclipses came around again, they emailed me again. And I was just like, okay, so I can honor this. I'm going to get a lawyer involved because the lawyers handle those things, and they chase them away. So that's just one subtle way to do it. Again, the placement in your chart is going to show how likely it is to show up on the outside of your life, or if it's more of an internal experience. And we all go through the cycles. So, you know, we have to everything there is a season, and that's another beautiful thing about it. So that's my main one. Aside from a unique Mars retrograde that we're going to be having later this year as well. And Mars hangs out for a while. Mars is going to retrograde through Gemini from Halloween through next year. So we'll be experiencing a lot of things that are, again, indicated by Mars. So turning your ambitions inward might be a general way to look at it, but finding Mars in your chart, Mars is personally my entire chart ruler, being the traditional ruler of Scorpio. So I know that I'm probably going to feel something because Mars rules a very pivotal point in my chart, as well as my creativity. So I can't wait to be doing books and things because it's in my fifth house, and that's where it's present. And it also rules my physical health. So I'm taking extra care of my physical health this year, coming into my own in my awareness of myself, and really giving myself creative projects to work on to channel that energy into. And that's simply like, this is what's on the buffet, and this is how I'm building my plate.
That really brings up a question of, you know, going in retrograde. You know, people talk about, well, it can't be in retrograde because they're just in the sky. And can you, like, you know, talk about what that actually means? And
yes. So the cycles of the planets going around the sun are called their synodic cycles. And you have to understand it from the perspective of Earth, because we're not talking about the sun witnessing the planets going around in circles, because that's what they're doing to the sun. From Earth, we're witnessing the planets go behind the sun and in front of the sun. And so when they do that, it looks like they're in the same part of the sky, and they're moving backwards through it because they're going on the other side of the loop. So for instance, we'll say Mercury. When Mercury is traveling behind the sun, they're not on the exact same plane. So Mercury is a little bit higher and we can see it. Or, you know, that's another level of declination in astrology. But we can see it in the sky until it gets really close to the sun. Sun is super bright, can't see Mercury anymore until it comes out from the other side. It has passed behind the sun. But during retrograde, it still has to go the other way. So it's circling the sun, but we see it going one way and the other, kind of like a typewriter, because we can't see it go behind us because it's in front of us. So because Mercury and Venus are placed between us and the sun, we see them go back and forth. And that's the easier ones to really explain. For the planets on the other side of us, it looks different on the chart, but it's the same concept. When they're on one side of Earth, they're looking to go one direction. When they're on the other side of the Earth and the sun, they're looking like they're going a different direction, but covering the same distance and space in the sky, which is also why their retrogrades last longer, because it's a bigger loop.
makes you think of Mercury. Just
oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, speedy little devil.
Yes. Well, you mentioned, you know, diving into more of your book stuff that coming up. For those who have businesses, have books, have launches, it's amazing to align with, you know, I don't know, the moon or whatever it is. What would you recommend aligning, you know, their business with, like, you know, launches or that kind of thing?
So this gets into electional astrology. It's looking ahead in time and saying what time is the best for what I want to do. My business partner and I actually have an endeavor we're launching, and I'm so excited because I found like this perfect opportune moment where it's an establishment. So we created like the rising sign goes along with that. You have to understand that when you're deciding to elect something, that's no longer a point in time in the future, it's a birth. So it's all about deciding how you want that personality that is coming into the world through your books, through your endeavor, through whatever it is, to function in this world. And so for writing, I highly recommend looking at, first of all, your own chart, find what writing looks good. I actually do this in my my readings. I have a technique that I use to be like, oh, here's your writing style. Here's what your book's probably about. Here's all this stuff. So get a reading with me if you're into that kind of specificity. But just in general, you can put Gemini on the ascendant, and then you know the writing is really good. I personally, for the sake of keeping Mercury, which is the writerly one there, I like Mercury ruled signs on the ascendant for writing and for books. I put Virgo there. Virgo is also my midheaven, so it incorporates my career and visibility into it. You could also do, if you were born during the day, especially a Jupiter ruled sign on the ascendant, and then just make sure that Jupiter is doing really well in the chart as well. Always also, this is a nice magical technique, check on the moon. Don't let the moon be afflicted or in a square or an opposition or anything like that, because the moon translates the light of all the stars to us. The sun and the moon translate light. That's why they're the luminaries. And so the moon, being the closest body to us, takes the light of all the other stars, filters it, and actually gives it to us. And that's why the moon is so important in our astrology. Not only that, but also because it's super close to us. So we feel that personally. The tides literally go by it. Our own functions kind of honor that push and pull of the sun and moon. So
That was such a beautiful statement. The sun and the moon translate light to us.
mm-hmm.
I mean, it's true, obviously. It's
Yeah.
just the way that that was the language of the stars. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and it's crazy how much that is interpreted in history too, with gods and goddesses that are so in those energies, and how we worshipped the sun and moon over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in fact, there is a theory that I subscribe to where at a certain point, that would have been around the age of Taurus, eons ago, there were more lunar deities that translated then into more solar deities. So more divine feminine worship that translated later into more divine masculine worship. And the balance that we find in between is something that even today that we know the journey of that. So it's a fascinating thing. It's when you learn astrology, you also inevitably will learn mythology, because Uranus and Saturn and Jupiter, all of those names really do play as well into the archetype of the personalities that they are named after.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you had mentioned you have a brief way to go through the signs to talk with the
Well, what's everyone's rising sign before we dive into that?
Mine's
Oh,
go ahead.
I'm Scorpio rising.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alyssa.
I am a Sag rising.
I'm a Capricorn.
I could see that. I like that. So I'm going to go through the rising signs in a really nice fundamental way that's going to help people kind of understand how to begin knowing the energies of the signs. And then I also have a couple keywords that go along with, if you're a rising sign, this may be your personality or how you navigate your life. Okay, so we'll start with Aries, because Aries does initiate at the vernal, or the equinox for the northern hemisphere, which is spring. I honor that it's the winter solstice, or the autumn equinox for the southern hemisphere. So Aries begins the zodiac, and so that is a cardinal, an initiatory energy. It's a fire element. And when it comes to the polarity of masculine or feminine, or as I like to do it, more yang and yin, then you have fire signs and air signs are very young. They're in the divine masculine. They are propelling themselves. They are offering out as compared to receiving. Compelling and receiving are the two that I like to differentiate in that way. The masculine energy is compelling. The feminine energy tends to be more receiving. And so Aries is cardinal, fire, and compelling, which makes that an independent individual who really likes to take action, could be very impulsive. Like it works for them to not have to think before they act, depending on the rest of their chart. But that comes into play for them. So it's the general at the head of it's Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, very motivating, very impactful, likes to just go out and make this world feel it, and they feel it in return. Then next you get Taurus. Taurus is a fixed sign, so very stable, very reliable, really likes routine. And then you have Earth, which is also stable and reliable and appreciates routine and resources and nature and those things that go along with Earth. And Earth and water signs are going to be yin. They're more receiving, and they're more relaxed in that way. So the divine feminine. So for Taurus, you have the steady support, the mom of the group, typically, right? If you're in a friend group, the Taurus tends to be the one that's like, have you eaten yet? Are you okay? And that's because Taurus rules the resources that support us. This includes finances, but it also includes all of the resources that sustain us. If it's the second house that it rules, which Taurus traditionally is placed in, then it is the second from you. So it's the things you own, your personal support. You come next to Gemini, which is considered mutable. Now, mutable is, I'm going to use a weather term again. If you think about a cloud comes into form in the cardinal energy. It is a cloud. It's probably one of those, just sustaining kind of clouds during fixed energy. Then the atmosphere becomes unstable and the cloud splits up and maybe you get a thunderstorm. That's mutable energy. It's changeable. So that's how you can think about mutability. So Gemini is mutable air. And again, the masculine, the yang energy. So it samples everything. It knows a lot about a lot of things, or a little about a lot of things, but it needs to be able to sample. It needs that freedom. We're going to talk about that even more when we get to Sagittarius, also mutable. So a lot of people will say, oh, air signs are unreliable. No, they're varied. And that's the difference. So air signs, mutable signs, they're just curious and they want to discover all of the options before picking one. Then they go shopping. That's totally fine. Taurus goes shopping too, but for other reasons. Cancer comes next. We're back to the cardinal part of the cycle. This is the cardinal water sign, again with the feminine. So Cancer is nurturing. The moon rules Cancer. So you think about this emotional well that really tends to want to nurture each other or nurture other people, because this cardinal energy likes to know that it belongs. So it becomes that person in the group who will just ride or die for you. And they will take care of you however they can. And so initiating, nurturing, and growth comes from that Cancer kind of energy. Next, we have Leo, which is the fixed fire energy. And that is why Leo is considered the leader. One of the reasons. Leo's not the, oh, look at me, look at me. Leo's ruled by the sun. It's exuberant. It likes fun. It's vivacious. It's taking advantage of life, but it's also fixed. So it's reliable. Leos are the ones, as the sun, that will go into the dark space, light it up, and then show you how to navigate there. So that's their leadership. It's not like the arrogance that sometimes is attributed to Leo. It can be. Sometimes people aren't really using the energy to its highest capacity, but in my experience with Leos, especially Leo risings, I married one, it's really great to see how they just want to be supportive and reliable, and how when their integrity is called into question as a role model, it freaks them out because they value it so much, that reliability in their leadership. Virgo is next. I have a soft spot for Virgo. Maybe because of my earth energy and my MC in Virgo, but Virgos are fantastic because they are mutable and earth. So they're varied and they're efficient. They're good at a lot of things. They're this jack of all trades. Let me show you how to do it too. I can support you kind of energy. So they test the effectiveness of things. Virgo is also very much attributed to service and efficiency. So when I worked for Disney World, 10 years ago, we had these core concepts of, safety, show, efficiency, and last but not least was sales. And so it was all about like, safety begins with me. How can we be efficient, but also be putting on a good show and also be doing this? And it just all jived together. It was the cogs in the machine that are well greased. Also, Walt Disney was a Virgo rising. So in case you were wondering.
In fact.
Yeah, Libra comes next, and that's the cardinal air energy. So Libra is initiatory in air, in curiosity, making connections and wanting to connect people. Again, they want to know that they fit in. So they're connecting, they're Venus ruled. They want to connect on a relationship level with people. They want friends. They want to be friendly. They want justice and fairness for everybody. They are the scales. They want things to balance out so that nobody loses out. And they're highly aware of that, which makes them sometimes a little bit too compromising in order to restore the balance. So it's very important for Libras to really honor that I fit in where I need to fit in and follow their curiosity of the air, that intellectual, I know how to make this fair, rather than I will change myself to make it fair, because you're not mutable, you're cardinal, you take the lead. And that's one of the things that with Venus being very much into her, romanticized view of how relationships should be. Libras, I find, need time on their own on occasion, which is very air of them, to remember who they are outside of the group and to honor their individuality, which is a very air thing to do.
So I have to say quickly, I was wrong. My moon is Capricorn. I'm actually Libra.
Are you? So did any of that resonate with you?
Yes, I'm like tearing up as you're saying this. I'm like, oh yeah.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad it resonates. Thank you for the confirmation.
Yes.
Yeah. And then next comes mine. I like how we're all on the line here because Scorpio's next and then Sagittarius. So for Scorpio is given to, they're so intense. And Scorpio is like the goth of the group and is associated very much with like death and transformation. Death is transformation. So like, I will die on this hill. But wow, that's a very Scorpio thing to say. So they are fixed and water. So they like the routine, but they have these emotions that are stirring around. If you think about Cancer as the river flowing rapidly and feeding the ocean, Scorpio, as a Scorpio rising, I'm going to say this is the puddle. It's stagnant water. So it's really taking the time to ruminate on what it knows and going deep with it. And that is deep experiential stuff. The next water sign will take it even deeper, and that will be the last one that we cover. But first, we're going to go into Sagittarius, which is mutable and fire. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Sagittarius is known as the traveler of the zodiac because they live through experience and sampling what life has to give. Again, with that mutability and sampling, it's about like, okay, I know you say this, but I want to experience it for myself. And I also want to experience those three things over there. And so there's a lot of shiny in a Sagittarius's worldview, which is great. I know one of the shadow sides that people tend to talk about with Sagittarius is, again, that unreliability. It's not unreliable, it's mutability. So it's not everyone is designed to always be the same. I have a lot of fixed in my chart. I end up not liking to change or adjust much, but mutable signs can. And because they can, in this case, let yourself. You should. You were built for this. You were born for it. Sample life. Otherwise, you're not going to be feeling at your best. So sampling experience is how I would kind of offer some keywords for Sagittarius risings. Allow yourself to investigate the world. Then we come to Capricorn risings. That's the cardinal earth sign. So again, they like to be reliable in the earth way so that they know that they have a place and they have meaning and that they offer value. They are the mountain, and like the rock that you lean on is very often going to be a Capricorn, but they're also ruled by Saturn. So they like their own time, they like their isolation, but they also want to know that what they build is going to last. Saturn is the planet that rules longevity and old age, and you don't reach old age if you weren't built to last. So while it represents deterioration, you don't deteriorate unless you got to that point. So it's one of the underappreciated aspects I find of Saturn. So I find that Capricorn is the anchoring of stability. They are that rock that you can lean on. Then we have Aquarius, not a water sign. Aquarius is the fixed air sign. So Aquarius is traditionally ruled by Saturn, but in a modern sense, we also attribute a lot of Uranian context to it as well. It's unique. It's the individual thinker. It removes itself from the crowd in order to get a higher perspective of the crowd to see what will work for everybody, what is equitable. And so Aquarius really enjoys being able to analyze, being special or on the outside enough to be able to apply their unique perspectives or even eccentric perspectives to a situation, to just turn it on its head a little bit and make something new that is built to last from here on out, where it might have served its purpose already. So it really can kind of identify this needs to change, and here's how we're going to change it so that it supports us from now on. So determined intellect is one of the ways that I like to see Aquarius. And then finally, Pisces. Pisces is the fish. It does what it says on the tin. It goes to the bottom of the ocean and it swims deep. This is the unconscious or the subconscious, traditionally associated with the 12th house. So if it's not, at the top of your awareness, it's in the depths of your awareness. And we have the swimming subconscious. So it's very mutable. It's like the currents under the water. You may not see it on the surface, but there's always something going on behind their eyes. And that's always they're very mystical in their persona. And that's the science. We did it.
Also thinking of those as like looking at my sons and their sun with their rising and like looking at just
That's a good question to touch on before we in the episode is how would you define the sun, the rising, and moon and how they relate to you personally?
Yeah, so I'm reading a wonderful book by Demetra George that is Astrology for the Authentic Self. Great book to read. And Demetra George is just a master. But the sun, in her way of articulating it, which is the best way I've found so far, is the sun is what you came here to do. It's your life purpose. The moon is how you're going to navigate it, how you're going to get it done in the physical realm. And the rising sign is the lens that you're going to use to navigate the world.
Oof. My Leo moon makes so much more sense now.
I always love hearing that. I like when people really feel validated by astrology rather than pigeonholed, like we had mentioned before. Your chart should always validate you, not the other way around. It's very important.
I love that phrase. And I'd say our challenge for, our listeners would be to go check out your rising sign one, hello, but also, find a little magic in your day by addressing each of the planets in the day. I mean, Alyssa and I do that. I love it. And it does
color coordinate.
Yes. So that's our little challenge for this episode. Thank you so much, KristaLyn, for being here. And we will see you on our next episode.
This concludes another episode of our Weaving Magic podcast.
We release one episode a week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the latest episode as soon as it releases. You can find us on Instagram at Weaving Magick Podcast. That's Weaving Magick, MAGICK Podcast.
We would also love it if you could leave us a review. If you do, make sure to email us your review so we can send you a thank you gift. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to find a way to weave magic into your daily life.